Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today you're checking out my brand new Magicka Nightblade PvP build. This build is updated for the Murkmire DLC, and I'm calling this the Heretic build because no more Swallow Soul, no funnel health. This is a completely different look at the Magicka Nightblade, but what I've come up with has really great stats, good survivability, and good burst damage. I'll explain the gear sets, the skills, champion points, and more coming up next. Alright, so let's go ahead and jump into the stats on the build first. Let me buff up, use a potion. And we're sitting at about 42k max Magicka, 18k health, 16k stamina, 2k Magicka recovery. Our other recoveries are decent as well, about 700 health recovery, 800 stamina recovery. Our spell damage with a potion is about 2200. That'll go up with our back bar glyph actually to about 2600. Spell critical is looking good at about 43%. And then for our resistances, when our defensive buff is running, you have about 1700 spell resistance and 1600 physical, and about 2500 crit resist. I'm not quite min-maxed on the character yet. I don't have full Undaunted passives unlocked. So if you were running 511, you could add an extra 6% to this and give you pretty high stats overall. Now I do have all of my points into Magicka, so 64 points there. For my race, I chose High Elf. High Elf is a very good choice for Magicka Nightblade. You could also do well with Dark Elf, Breton, even Argonian would not be bad. For my potions here, I'm just using the basic spell damage Alliance War potions. And then for our food, I went with something kind of different here. I'm using Spring-Loaded Infusion. This is actually a drink that gives you buffs to all 3 of your max stats. So I'll go over why I'm using that in a little bit. I did decide to use something a bit different for the Mundus as well. I'm actually using the Steed, and that's just to kind of help with our health recovery. Sort of our healing overall is going to come a lot from health recovery on this build. And I do like the extra movement speed too, especially while you're in cloak trying to move around and get positioned. The extra 10% is actually pretty helpful, but you could definitely do something else here like the Atronach if you wanted more recovery, or you could put more max Magicka, more spell damage, whatever you like really. I am a vampire on the build, but I did reduce that to stage 2, so I do like the extra stamina and Magicka recovery from stage 2 vampire, but you definitely don't need this. You can decide to go without vampire, it'll be totally fine. And you'll actually get more health recovery out of the build and be a little bit tankier. So your choice on that. Alright, so let's jump into the sets next. Starting with our first 5-piece, I am using Shacklebreaker. This should come as no surprise. It's great on the Magicka Nightblade build. You get the extra spell damage, Magicka recovery, stamina recovery is always really good in PvP, and then you get that max Magicka and max stamina bonus. So just tons of stats that you get from this set. I tried to push as many stats into the build as I could this time. So I definitely recommend this for your first 5-piece set. The way I've done this is just kind of crafting pieces to go along with other pieces that I got. So I'm using 2 weapons here for the first 2 pieces. I've got the Infernal Staff infused, and then the Resto Staff also infused, and then I am running a chest piece. Impen in heavy. Heavy armor chest just gives you the most resistance as possible, which is helpful. And then I'm also using legs in light and a neck piece. But again, you can sort of just mix and match pieces with your other set. The other set that we are using is Bright Throats. So this is another very good max stat set. This is new with the Murkmire DLC. You get 2 max Magicka bonuses, Magicka recovery bonus, and then the 5-piece is max Magicka and Magicka recovery. So again, just trying to get as much stats as I could. I think these 2 sets basically do it. You do have to use a drink buff though, and that's why again we're using the Spring-Loaded Infusion, which gives me tons of stats as well, and then it'll proc the 5-piece for Bright Throat. So the pieces that I was able to pick up was the boots, Impen, gloves, Impen. My waist I wish was Impen, but I just have Invigorating right now. So you can run 3 pieces on the body and 2 jewelry, or just however you set that up. You can actually craft shackle breaker jewelry and run more body pieces, whatever works for you. But that's what I'm using for my second 5-piece set. So just great stats overall. And then for the monster set, I decided to go with something that would provide a little bit more healing. Like I mentioned in the intro, I'm not using Swallow Soul at all. So that usual healing over time that you have running in on a Magicka Nightblade is not going to be there on this setup. So I wanted to pick something that would help with that. So I ended up picking Troll King for my monster set. And this just gives lots of bonuses to healing with your health recovery boosted anytime you drop below 50%. You get that nice health recovery boost. Even though I'm a stage 2 vampire, I get close to 3k health recovery on the build, which is great. And if you're not a vampire, it'll be even better. So this is a great set to run if you decide not to use Swallow Soul in this patch. As far as traits, I'm using as much impen as possible. 1 or 2 pieces of well fitted will be good. For the weapons, I mentioned double infused, so the infused Inferno Staff with an absorb Magicka glyph. This is a great option for sustain now. You can see we get close to 500 Magicka back, and that'll be on a 2-second cooldown with the infused trait, so it's actually very good for sustain. And the damage is not much less, especially in no CP, which is what I play this build in. The damage is not much less than a flame glyph. So I definitely recommend that for your front bar, especially if you're having trouble sustaining. On the back bar, we're using the infused Berserker glyph, so we get that extra 500 or so spell damage, and again, that can be procced off cooldown. Really easy just to do a little light attack tap and get that extra spell damage bonus. And then for the jewelry, I just crafted some blue jewelry for Shackle Breaker, and Bright Throat is still way expensive. I'd recommend buying blue for that and just crafting it up, upgrading it to purple when you have the chance. I'm using 2 spell damage glyphs here and 1 Magicka recovery. What you can do on this build also, if you have, let's say, your Undaunted unlocked, is you can actually transmute some of these traits to infused. I think you have enough, you have over 40k Magicka, which is plenty on this build, and you can get more stats that way by using some infused jewelry pieces. So I definitely recommend that if you have the stones to transmute, or if you have the traits to craft that in Shackle Breaker. So I think I mentioned before, we are using 5 light, and then you can do 1 piece of medium, 1 piece of heavy. I prefer the heavy chest, but you can also do 5 light, 2 heavy, just to get some extra health. I am using 1 health enchant on my chest piece. The reason why I did that is usually I use Valken Scoria. That's another good damaging monster set if you want to produce more damage. Valken Scoria does have the extra health bonus, so I just wanted to make sure my health was high enough. So 1 health glyph will be helpful if you're not using Valken. I think that covers the gear. Let's go ahead and jump into the skills. So some different things here that got mixed up with the new DLC. Lots of changes to the Magicka Nightblade overall, so I tried to adjust for that the best that I could. Starting off with our first ability, this is our Execute Impale. This does a very good burst of damage if your opponent is below 25% health, and has a nice max range, so this is really helpful for getting kills. I definitely recommend this on your front bar. You also get some nice boosts from your assassination passives by having those slotted. You'll get the Executioner passive, which will help your sustain a little bit when you get those kills. And with our Pressure Points passive, the more assassination skills you have slotted, the more crit bonus you have on your front bar. Next up, I'm using Inner Light, and I'd say this is sort of a flex spot. You could do other things here. You could run, for example, Flame Reach if you want to have a stun on your front bar. But I just found that Flame Reach wasn't really effective. If you have the Master Staff, you could kind of rearrange your build for that. But for me, I didn't really need the stun on the front bar, so I just went with more stats. And what I really like about this is I do get the Major Prophecy buff, which gives us that 10% spell critical rating. So I really like having this on the front bar, but you can slot different things here, like for example, Flame Reach, which I mentioned. You could also put Shade here if you want to use that, but again, I didn't feel like I needed it, and I like the extra stats. Next up is Shadowy Disguise. This is our cloak, pretty standard on a Nightblade build. This just helps you weave in and out of combat, makes you harder to kill, and helps you get the jump on your opponent, so I definitely like having this on the front bar. You also get a little bit extra max health from having this slotted, and this does proc our defensive buff, our major resolve and major ward. So throwing this on every few seconds is helpful. For our spammable attack, this is where I decided to mix things up. I just wasn't happy with the nerfs that came about for Magicka Nightblade in Murkmire, especially the nerf to Swallow Soul. Swallow Soul was very helpful for Magicka Nightblades in PvP because you had that extra passive healing buff. You no longer have that, so I decided just not to run the skill at all and make up the healing elsewhere. That's where Troll King is very helpful. But I do like this skill. The cost is similar to Swallow Soul, and the damage is actually higher. Especially when you get crits, you get a chance to crit all 3 of these damage attacks, so your potential damage is actually a lot higher with this skill if you can maintain it. That's why having sustain sets like Bright Throat really help on this build. But I am liking this as the main spammable. It does tons of damage, especially when 1 or 2 or even all 3 of those damage sources crit. Next up, we've got Siphoning Attacks, and this is just a nice passive buff to have. You can see it gives you healing, almost 2k health on your light attacks, and they restore Magicka over time. So really helpful for sustain and keeping our health topped off. The other reason why you want at least one siphoning skill is for the Magicka Nightblade passives. You have Magicka Flood, which increases your max Magicka by 8%. Normally we would fulfill this by having Funnel Health or Swallow Soul on the front bar, but since we got rid of that skill, I had to slot something, and Siphoning Attack's definitely the way to go to make sure we get that passive. Last up is Soul Harvest, and this just gives you a nice bit of burst damage. Gives your enemy major defile, and you get that extra 20% damage bonus for 6 seconds. This is a ranged build, so you won't use this all the time. I'm finding that I actually use my backbar ultimate quite a bit more, but it is really nice to have this in close combat. And the extra ultimate on each kill is very nice. You can see 10 ultimate every time you gain a kill on your front bar, which will be a lot. So let's switch to back bar. This is our Resto Staff bar. I'm using Crippling Grasp, and I use this more as a defensive skill because it does have the immobilization, which is really helpful if you have, let's say, a Stamina Templar or a Stamina Nightblade coming after you, trying to close the gap. This is really helpful just to have for that extra bit of defense. It does a nice damage over time, so applying this to your target will help you get them down quicker. This also fulfills our siphoning passive, so remember we need at least one siphoning skill on each bar. We've got Siphoning Attacks on the front bar, and then Crippling Grasp on the back bar. Next I'm using Harness Magicka. This is our damage shield. I like this because I do mostly play as a ranged build on this setup, so getting that extra Magicka absorption, that extra Magicka back, every time we absorb some damage is nice. It does help a lot with sustain. You can choose the other damage shield version, the other morph of this, if you want to have a little bit higher shield, but I found the extra sustain just to be more helpful overall. Next up, Mass Hysteria. This is a great defensive skill, and you can use it on offense as well. Sometimes I will use this to stun an enemy and then just pull off some burst attacks on them while they're running away. It's a hard CC. It's hard to break sometimes, so you can get a good amount of burst off if you do initiate with this. So definitely a great skill to have. I use this all the time. Next up is our heal, and I chose Mutagen over Healing Ward. I have used Healing Ward in the past, but that did get nerfed in this patch. So I think Mutagen is a much better option in this case. It gives you a heal over time, which is going to help proc your Troll King. Anytime you drop below 50%, this healing tick will get that to proc. And then if you fall below 20%, you can actually get a burst heal, which is very nice to have, and it removes one harmful effect. The thing to keep in mind is that if you do get that burst heal, you need to recast this because it consumes the buff. Next up, we got Merciless Resolve. The reason I had this on the back bar is I did want the extra crit damage that we get from the Assassination passive for having one of these abilities slotted. So I wanted to have this on both bars. And it actually works pretty well on the back bar. You can charge it up with 5 light attacks, do some damage, and then go from your Mass Hysteria, which is also on the back bar, into your Merciless Resolve bow proc and just do tons of damage. So having it on the back bar, an extra source of burst damage, is really nice to have. And then last but not least, we're using the classic Resto Staff Ultimate. This just helps us get a ton of burst healing when we need it. One thing I'll recommend though is don't use this initially. What's more helpful in most cases is pop your shield and then get your Lights Champion going. That'll just help you stay alive long enough to actually make use of the healing. This skill provides tons of group utility too, lots of healing to your group. So don't be afraid to use this, especially in battlegrounds when your team is charging up against the opposing team. This will help put your team over the top in a lot of cases. So let's take a quick look at champion points. This build is optimized for no CP, for battlegrounds especially, but I think this will work pretty well. So in the green tree, I put 40 into Warlord, 35 into Sprinter, 23 in Tenacity. You do a fair bit of heavy attacks. 64 Arcanist, 23 into Mooncalf. If you decide to use Troll King like I did, I would definitely recommend pumping up Healthy. So I put 27 points into there. 28 Shadow Ward, 28 into Tumbling, and then I had 2 left over, so I put those into Befoul. 27 into Blessed, 28 into Elfborn, 56 Elemental Expert, 36 into Spell Erosion, 39 Staff Expert, 66 Master Arms, 7 into Shattering Blows, and then just 11 into Thaumaturge because the focus really is direct damage for this build, not dot damage so much. But a little bit here will help your Crippling Grasp. 61 Ironclad, 44 into Resistance, 56 into Hardy and Elemental Defender, 16 into Thick Skinned, and then 37 into Quick Recovery. Well, that's going to wrap it up for the Magicka Nightblade PvP build updated for Murkmire. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments below. As always, if you did enjoy the video, I'd appreciate you leaving a like. And if you're not subscribed to the channel already, why the heck not? It's free and it would really help me out. I do my best to create new builds and content every week, and you should expect a lot more of that coming up in 2019. So until then, I will see you around in the next video. Peace.